And Figileli Ngwati coming up in this hour.
What we are seeing now is that the negotiations are coming now to a point. The real issues are now being identified.
And Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is in South Africa to hold talks with his South African counterpart.
We're now taking the route of STEAM education, where students learning from a very tender age how to innovate, problem solve, and so forth.
And Botswana's Minister of Child Welfare and Basic Education promotes the STEAM curricula. But first, the news with Jwalani Tulongwepe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Lulu. Good day. Members of the Mkhonto weSizwe Party in South Africa say they are opposed to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's official visit to South Africa, as it is a member of BRICS. Spokesperson for the party, Nhlamulo Ndlela, spoke to Channel Africa outside one of the main gates of the Union buildings in Pretoria, where they were picketing. Zelensky is in South Africa on an official visit and will meet with the country's President Cyril Ramaphosa. Ndlela says Ukraine is being used as a tool to fight their wars against Russia by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO.
We're saying that we cannot have a situation where we bring issues outside of this country and give ourselves problems we don't have in our country. We can't. So Ramaphosa is bringing us problems we don't have in our country, and we're saying that we can't be harboring people, by the way, of the same Ukraine when the war started. There were racist towards Africans there. And now here we are bringing a person who doesn't even represent us ideologically and whose agenda is a neo-imperial, neoliberal posture. We're saying, no, Ramaphosa, don't bring us problems we don't have.
The Pietermaritzburg High Court in the KwaZulu-Natal province has dismissed South Africa's former President Jacob Zuma's application for leave to appeal against the court's refusal to remove the lead prosecutor, Advocate Billy Downer, from the corruption case. The defense is arguing that Downer is biased and that Zuma will not get a fair trial. Judge Nkosinathi Chili has said in his ruling it's the second time that Zuma is bringing such an application. Judge Chili ruled that the appeal has no reasonable prospects of success.
It is my view that no court will find that the substantive order made by this court was wrong. When advancing reasons, as requested, I made a point that the application that served before me was the second of its kind, albeit with a different strategy. Issues raised in the application for the removal of Mr. Downer as public prosecutor, including the Glenister issue, have been ventilated in previous litigation.
As Malawi inches closer to the 2025 general elections, opposition parties are once again considering the idea of forming a political alliance. Some parties have announced that they will not contest the upcoming September 16th general elections independently, signalling plans to form a political alliance with other parties. The move has drawn praise from some political analysts who say it reflects the current political landscape in Malawi. The September 16th presidential and legislative elections are one of the most consequential in the country's recent history. Presidential candidate Enoch Chihana is the current president of the Alliance for Democracy Party.
What is also happening in Malawi now is that the political parties in the opposition are also talking. We may have very soon an alliance also, like what happened in the Tonsa Alliance. This is what is happening at the moment. It's being discussed anytime within 30 days.
Police in Tanzania have detained two senior opposition figures as they drove to court hearing for the Chadema party leader Tundu Lissu today. Lissu, who was a runner-up in a presidential election in 2020, was charged with treason this month over what prosecutors said was a speech calling on the public to rebel and disrupt presidential and parliamentary elections that are expected to take place in October. Days later, the country's election commission disqualified Chadema from taking part in the elections on the grounds that it failed to sign an election code of conduct on time. The charges against Lissu, who survived being shot 16 times in 2017, have placed the president of the country, Samia Suluhu Hassan's human rights record under the spotlight as she seeks re-election. And finally, Russia has carried out a major drone and missile attack on Kyiv. Emergency services say at least 9 people were killed and dozens wounded. It comes hours after US President Donald Trump hauled more pressure on Ukraine to make territorial concessions. The BBC's John Donison reports.
In the early hours of the morning, anti-aircraft fire lit up the sky over central Kyiv as Russia attacked the city with missiles and drones. Explosions could be seen from our rooftop position and people ran for shelter. The northeastern city of Kharkiv was also targeted. The attacks come as diplomatic efforts to bring an end to the war grind on. President Trump, who has been criticised for not taking a tough enough line on Russia, again lashed out at President Zelensky on social media. He accused the Ukrainian leader of being inflammatory and of harming efforts to reach a peace deal.
For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Cholani Tulongwebe.
And in our sports headlines this hour, I'm Fikile Lingwati. Tell you what, Egyptian Giants Al Ahly fans will be allowed in the stadium when they face Mamelodi Sundowns in the second leg of their African Champions League clash. And Jose Maria Alothabal has been named as Europe's third vice-captain for the Ryder Cup on the American soil. I will be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
SABC News. The African Perspective. Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo on Channel Africa.
It's 12:07 Central African time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Thank you to Fikile Lingwati and Jolani Tulongwebe with our sports and news update. Join us in conversation on our social media platforms. That's on X, Instagram, and subscribe on YouTube at Channel Africa 1. On Facebook at Channel Africa, you can also send us your comments and voice notes to +2763, that's 406 9126, #Africa Update, and let us know what your thoughts, and let us know what your country, which country you're in. And also, if you have any stories that you'd like us to highlight or to focus on, send us an email. It is newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or give us a call on +27 11 714 4459.
Africa Update on Channel Africa.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has cancelled part of his first visit to South Africa after an overnight Russian missile and drone attack on Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. At least 9 people were killed and more than 80 injured, including children, in the attack, according to local officials. He was supposed to meet with President Cyril Ramaphosa on a working visit today. Earlier, Channel Africa's reporter Michael Mbewe spoke to political analyst Professor Dirk Kotzer on Zelensky's visit.
Well, this is a good example of a non-aligned position, a policy of non-alignment. And it is also therefore a message to the different global players. I think in this case specifically the United States, who accused South Africa of being too much seen as pro-Russia, and in this case now being willing to associate directly with Ukraine also. So from a more broader African and global perspective, that is certainly, I think, one of the understandings. I think at the same time, this is one of the reasons why President Ramaphosa also had a telephone conversation with President Putin, is to explain it in that terms, because the Russians can easily now say, well, it means South Africa has now moved away from us, and that therefore we won't be able to communicate with South Africa as in the past.
But he comes also under immense pressure from the US to sign a deal where he's being pushed to, one of the terms is to surrender the pursuit of, I think, Crimea, and then also the pursuit of Ukraine joining NATO, of which yesterday Zelensky refused. He is going through a lot.
Yes, I think what we are seeing now is that the negotiations are coming now to a point. The real issues are now being identified, and that in essence is two main issues. The one is, from the Russian point of view, their demand for territory, like Crimea and the eastern part of Ukraine, From the Ukrainian point of view, it's security guarantees about their borders in the future, and that they won't be threatened by any country like Russia again. And it's two, in a sense, looks like two mutually exclusive positions. And that is the real why these negotiations are so difficult, is to be able to find a middle ground. That means that on both sides they will have to make some concessions. And ultimately they will have to accommodate the essence of both of those demands or those issues.
In terms of trade, this is now our parting shot. In terms of trade, where can these two nations leverage? What opportunities are there, for both nations?
Well, when it comes to South Africa and the Ukraine, in the case of the Ukraine, they are part of the Black Sea food basket of the world to a large extent. We already import quite a lot from both Ukraine as well as Russia in terms of wheat or fertilizer. And if the situation is more stabilized in the Black Sea region, that will be to the advantage of South Africa from an import point of view. From an export point of view, given what is happening in the US now with trade tariffs, we are looking for new markets. So this situation here, if we can make an impression on the Ukrainians that we are not antagonistic towards them, it will also open up in future possibilities for wider trade to the eastern part of Europe and not only the western part.
And that was political analyst Professor Dirk Kotzer speaking to Channel Africa's reporter Michael Mbewe. Now, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, together with his wife, the First Lady Olena Zelensky, arrived in South Africa in the early hours of this morning. He was greeted by South Africa's Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Ronald Lamola, along with other officials, as well as Ukraine's ambassador to South Africa, Lyubov Abravitova. Our South African political party, Umkhonto weSizwe, party members kept their promise to protest outside the union buildings during the visit, where Channel Africa's reporter Sisi Sikhalo joins us on the line. Sisi, good afternoon and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon, Lulu, and good afternoon to the listeners.
Now, Sisi, take us through the events since this morning outside the union buildings today.
Perhaps, Lulu, let me take you back and the listeners that when we headed to Pretoria this morning, we were expecting to witness a protest at the Ukraine embassy by the South African Communist Party. You'd remember that the South African Communist Party is an alliance of the African National Congress, which has been governing South Africa for 30 years. But now the party is governing the country with other political parties in what is known as the Government of National Unity. So we were expecting that action this morning at the Ukraine embassy, but when we were here in Pretoria, we were informed that that action has been cancelled. We then proceeded to the Union Building, to one of the main gates of the Union Building. And earlier in the morning, it was quiet with journalists coming in. You know, you wouldn't think that there would be, something going on. But later we saw the Umkhonto weSizwe party outside one of the main gates, protesting, carrying placards, even though it was just a few members, but it was heavily raining at the time. It's quite chilly even in Johannesburg, Lulu. And we saw them, saying what they have been saying in the past 2 weeks, that they will protest during the visit of the Ukraine president. We saw, them outside the main gate, one of the main gates, and the police. There was a discussion. I wouldn't say call it a squabble, but rather a discussion between them and the police this morning. The police wanting them to move from the gate where they were, and the party saying they chose the spot particularly because they know that the president of Ukraine will pass by the gate. There was that discussion in the morning, but eventually the police managed to persuade the party to move to another gate. Perhaps, Lulu, let me also take you to what the party, one would say, is a party leader in the protest, was the senior member Nhlamulo Ndlela, who's the spokesperson, who told Channel Africa that the Ukraine was being used as a tool to fight their own wars against Russia, particularly by NATO, and that the country, South Africa, is a member of BRICS, which include Russia, and he did not understand why South Africa was entertaining Ukraine. He also said that South African President Cyril Ramaphosa was bringing the country the problems that they do not have, that when the war started between Russia and Ukraine, that Ukraine was aggressive towards Africans, and further said that the country does not share the same ideology with Ukraine.
Now, Sisi, with that in mind, they are aware that there was a conversation between Russia's President Vladimir Putin and South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa. I think this was last week, if I'm not mistaken, that this had taken place, and there was a mutual understanding, and I guess this is why this has continued. But moving on from that, the Minister of Finance in South Africa has backtracked on the 0.5 VAT increase. What did the MK spokesperson have to say about that?
Lulu, he came out strongly against the government of national unity, labeling the members of the government of national unity as lazy thinkers. He said he was not surprised by the backtracking by the minister, because even the adoption was not procedural. He said Parliament was still using Roman Dutch law, and he basically repeating what the party has been saying, that they want to be given the opportunity to lead, or rather they were the rightful leader of society. And he said even the Democratic Alliance, he went on to blame Democratic Alliance, which that it has been fiercely opposing the VAT increase to a point where they took the matter to court. And we saw this morning, rather the news that came out that, the minister has backtracked.
Right. And what is happening now currently at the union buildings with the story that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky will be going back home? What's the situation there?
At the gate where I am, Lulu, which is one of the main gates, is quiet, but we see a movement of the cars. Earlier, I tend to believe that it's when the President Zelensky came in that we saw security cars coming in, a lot of police and, official cars coming in. But at the moment, it's quiet. The Umkhonto Wesizwe Party have been moved, as I said earlier, that they were persuaded to move. So they've moved to another gate. And even though they were protesting, Lulu, it was not a large number of them. It was just a few members of them. So they moved to another gate. But at the main gate where I am, it's quiet at the moment.
Sissy, before I let you go, let's go back to the Ukraine embassy where the SACP was meant to protest, or there's supposed to be some sort of protest action taking place there today. What reasons were given with regards to the cancellation of the protest?
Quite a surprise, Lulu, because what we were told this morning was that it was because of the weather. Initially, what they told us yesterday, that they told us that they're going to be having two protests. The one will be in Soweto and the other one here in Pretoria. And surprisingly, in the morning, I got that message that, we are cancelling because of the weather. And there will only be one protest, which will be in Soweto.
Well, Sissy, thank you for joining us. We'll leave it there for today.
Thank you, Lulu.
That's Channel Africa reporter Sisi Sikhalo joining us on the line from South Africa's capital, Pretoria.
Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time.
It is 12:19 Central African Time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Côte d'Ivoire's opposition leader, Tijane Tiem, says he will fight on to run in the West African nation's presidential election, despite a court ruling to have him removed from the electoral roll. More on this Reuters report.
Africans need to have the right and the possibility to choose freely who should lead them. That's all we're asking for.
Ivory Coast's opposition leader Tidjane Thiam said on Wednesday that he plans to fight on to run in the country's presidential election, despite having been removed from the electoral roll. An Ivory Coast court made the ruling on Tuesday, saying the 62-year-old was a French national when he registered. The decision, which cannot be appealed, could end the Ivorian-born Thiam's ambition to run in the presidential election due in October. Speaking to Reuters in Paris, Thiam said his party PDCI would not put up an alternative candidate. Instead, they plan to use their political weight nationally and internationally so that, quote, reason prevailed.
It's not for the government to decide who runs opposition parties or who gets to run against them, and that's what we're trying to do. And I really want the same criteria and demands to be put on Africa as any other part of the world. I don't accept the shrugging and saying this is Africa. I've been getting calls, well, what did you expect? Of course, they were going to block you through dubious means, but I want Africa to be respected, and I'm going to fight so that that type of governance disappears.
The former Credit Suisse CEO was elected leader of the PDCI in 2023. He was seen as a leading contender for the election, though incumbent President Alassane Ouattara has yet to say whether he will run again. Thiam renounced his French citizenship in February to meet eligibility conditions for the election. Ivory Coast law states that candidates must be Ivorian citizens and cannot hold another nationality. A decision published in France's official journal last month showed that Thiam had been relieved of his French citizenship.
Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time.
Ritmos e cultura com o embaixador da música africana e lusófona, Jacob Wakantivani.
Mombali nanga kasongo mbona wewe songa libala mbona wewe mombali nanga
tem sentido tanto a sua falta e do ritmo de cultura onde você esteve, meu querido embaixador.
É 2025 e o embaixador da música africana e lusófona, Jacob Wakantivani.
It's 12:22 Central African Time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has directed an immediate and comprehensive overhaul of national security strategies, demanding urgent action to end the escalating violence in Borno, Benue, and Plateau and Kwara states. He met with the security chiefs at the State House in Abuja and once again condemned the senseless targeting of innocent Nigerians. President Tinubu has ordered a new approach to tackling the insecurity problem. Now, to discuss this further, we have on the line Dr. Christian Ani, peace and security expert and senior researcher and project coordinator at the Institute of Security Studies. Dr. Ani, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, what do you make of this directive from President Tinubu, and why now? What's happened now that there's this call for an urgent, action to be taken?
Yeah, so in Nigeria today, as in we have a whole lot of different types of conflicts that is going on. Not just conflict on its own, but then you also have various forms of violence that is happening against populations across the country, and this is happening at a large scale. But this is not the first time, though. I think we need to know that this is not the first time. This violence has been ongoing, for over a decade now. It's been ongoing. When we look at one of the places that you mentioned just now in Borno, we're talking about the Boko Haram crisis right there, and affecting a whole mass of people within the northeast region. When you talk about the Plateau State and then also the Benue, speaking about issues that have been ostensibly termed as farmer header crisis, but then which is also banditry and criminals going around killing people, all in the name of differences in religious affiliation or whether it's in ethnic affiliations where necessary. So these are happening at an unprecedented scale. Just in Plateau State, for instance, we had last week we had mass murder of people in Basa local government. Several people killed, even including children. And then we have just recently another killing in a place called Pushit, where several people, 50, were killed in those communities. So those are happening in those areas. But then, there are other lingering conflicts that we already have in the southeast area and the southwest, and even the south-south. So it's across board. And then, when you look at what are the interventions that have been taking place to address this crisis, it has fallen short. I can continue on and on about the security crisis that we have in Nigeria. But I think one of the key challenges that it's ongoing right now is that, these responses of the security officials have been going after soft targets. Now, for instance, you have people who may be traffic violations or some people suspected of crime. You see the police and then the military officers being sent out to deal with it decisively. Just recently, there was a protest by some group that identified themselves as Islamic movement in Abuja. The military went all in, all out against those groups. But the hard targets are being left out there. Yes, we understand that there are areas that are ungoverned spaces. There are large ungoverned spaces in Nigeria where maybe the securities cannot go to. But then the sheer absence of security posts in some of these communities actually makes it very deadly for them. You find security posts along the highways and all that, but that doesn't work. In communities, before they can get there, criminality already happened there.
Now,
So
the president also reportedly highlighted the need for the involvement or to involve local councils and state governments more in tackling insecurity cases. Why is this important? And why are they going for soft targets when they should be focusing on the bigger crisis that the country is facing?
Yeah, so I think that's a good one. So why they want to involve local actors is because local actors actually have the key intelligence. They have they understand the dynamics on the ground. If military and security officers are to work, they have to understand, where to go and how to go about those. But then that in Nigeria, there's a current proposition on the ground that state security, for instance, the police should be devolved to the state level, that it should be managed from the state level rather than being managed centrally from the federal government. So this talk have been ongoing, but then the federal government does not want to relinquish power to the state government. Also, there are fears of abuses by state government taking, going over it with security interventions and the like. But so that question is still ongoing. So, for instance, the governor of Plateau State, before he has to mobilize, the police and then the military actors to go and then act decisively, he has to get all the approvals also from the federal government. And sometimes, a lot of these issues, as I said earlier, are politicized. So, for instance, for it to go and then attack the bandits, there might be claims, from those groups that, those are either whether Muslim or Haida communities. And depending on where the allegiance of the current federal government lies, then it could say, no, it will not intervene decisively. The same goes the other way around. If the person is from the south, that they may not take decisive action accordingly. So those are the things affecting Nigeria's security. Also, when you spoke about why are they not affecting going there, to engage those hard targets that we were speaking about.
And just very quickly in wrapping up, Dr. Ani, why is insecurity such a huge problem in Nigeria? I mean, we've seen the failings of the former president, Muhammadu Buhari, and now, it seems nothing much has really changed. What needs to be done differently?
Yeah, I think what needs to be done differently is that we need to go back to the drawing board, the government. This is not just a security matter. This is a pure issue of poverty and marginalization that have been affecting specific groups of people, both in terms of receiving governance and even receiving those security outposts that I spoke to you about. That in some of those states, in some of those local governments, you go miles and miles, you will not see a police station or a military office, for instance, a military outpost or anything. You also not see government support to those areas. In Nigeria, most people live, on their own will, as in they kind of have outsourced every security to themselves, whether it's electricity, we're talking about whether it's water systems, everyone has to provide it for themselves. So in some areas, the government is leading. If the government is not there, how will the people survive? Over this kind of cascading security challenge has led to
Dr. Ani, unfortunately, we have run out of time and we are going to have to leave it here for today. Thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Thank you.
That's Dr. Christian Ani, a senior researcher and project coordinator at the Institute for Security Studies, joining us on the line. It is 12:30 and our news headlines up next with Ralani Tulongwepe.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Lulu. Good afternoon. Making headlines, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has cancelled part of his first visit to South Africa after an overnight Russian missile and drone attack on Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. At least 9 people were killed and more than 80 injured, including children, in the attack. 9 suspects, including 2 Border Management Authority officials, are appearing at the Musina Magistrates Court in South Africa's Limpopo province on charges of corruption. The 2 officials and 2 suspected facilitators were arrested with 5 undocumented immigrants on Tuesday at the Beitbridge border post. And finally, as Malawi inches closer to the 2025 general elections, opposition parties are once again considering the idea of forming a political alliance. Some parties have announced that they will not contest the upcoming September 16 general elections independently, signalling plans to form a political alliance with other parties. I will have details on these and other stories at 1 o'clock.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Jalani. Our sports update up next with Figlele Ngwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Good afternoon, Lulu. We begin with football news this hour. Egyptian Giants Al Ahly officials says they will be allowed full attendance at Cairo Stadium when they face Mamelodi Sundowns in the second leg of the African Champions League clash in Cairo on Friday. Egyptian authorities usually allow a maximum of 30,000 fans to attend continental club games at home, as was the case when Stellenbosch upset Zamalek in the African Confederations Cup quarterfinal earlier this month. But Al Ahly made a successful appeal to allow for full attendance, citing the importance of the clash and the impact of the crowd on such a fixture. With their request approved, the Egyptian Giants will be able to fill Cairo International Stadium, which has a maximum capacity of 75,000 fans. And Friday's second leg follows a goalless draw in last Saturday's first leg at Loftus Versfeld in Pretoria. Sundowns have enjoyed success against Al Ahly in continental competition in recent years, winning 4 and drawing 3 of the last 7 clashes between the 2 titans of African football. Al Ahly, who have won 4 of the last 5 editions of the competition, are chasing their third success Champions League title, which would take the club's all-time tally to 13 titles. This is 8 more than the next best clubs, TP Mazembe from the Democratic Republic of the Congo and fellow Egyptian side, Zamalek. The legendary South African national women's football player Nuku Matlou, who recently retired from international football with 174 caps, acknowledges that it is not going to be easy for Banyana Banyana during the highly anticipated Women Africa Cup of Nations WAFCON tournament in July 2025. However, Matlou believes Desiree Ellis and her charges have what it takes to defend the WAFCON title in Morocco.
It's not going to be easy, but with the team, I think they have a better position to defend it, defend the title. But remember, every year the team they always improve. Remember, the Nigeria are wounded lions that they want to come back and defend it. They also Ghana, they are coming back. They're coming back in the tournament. So it's not going to be easy, but I believe in the team.
Golf news: Jose Maria Olazabal has been named as Europe's third vice captain for this year's Ryder Cup in New York. Olazabal, who captained Team Europe to their last victory on American soil in 2012, returns to his role from 2023 when Europe beat the United States 16.5, 11.5 to regain the Ryder Cup in Rome. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Figure Lingwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Africa, meet Abedi.
Yeah, that's me.
Abedi is a music lover through and through.
I really love African music.
He's got a taste for all kinds of tunes and spends his days listening to Channel Africa. Guess what? He didn't know.
Okay.
Channel Africa wants to help Abedi and all music lovers everywhere to discover even more incredible music. That is why Channel Africa is calling on all African musicians to submit their music. Musicians, remember to give us all your relevant information. Make your submissions at music@channelafrica.co.za. Submissions are your chance to be heard on radio. But sadly, they do not guarantee that you'll be playlisted. All submissions will be carefully reviewed to see if they meet our station's requirement. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time.
Our business news up next with Nosipo Zuma.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Lulu. Good afternoon. In your business news this hour, lecturer and business consultant Dr. Alex Kumau says Kenyan President William Ruto's 4-day state visit to China may impact the country's relations with the U.S. His comments come as U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio abruptly cancelled his trip to Nairobi as well as Addis Ababa. Kumau says that the trade balance between Kenya and the U.S. may be impacted if Kenya takes a pro-China stance.
There are likely to be consequences for the choice that Kenya has taken, because when Trump was actually implementing the reciprocal tariff, it was about those countries that are not giving more business to US, and it was about how much is US exporting to you as a country vis-a-vis how much are we importing as US from that other country. If Kenya is more pro-China, it means that instead of buying so much from US, it will be buying so much from China, and that will adversely affect the trade balance between the two countries.
International Monetary Fund Chief Economist Pierre-Olivier Corinchas says regional growth in sub-Saharan Africa improved significantly last year to 4% and it will ease in 2025. Now, this is in line with softer global outlook. Due to Africa's advantage being the demographic dividend coming from having a young population, the IMF believes that structural reforms and investment in healthcare, education and human capital, as well as international cooperation are necessary. Corinchas says if these aspects are sustained, the increasing trade tensions and uncertainty will slow global economic growth significantly.
Under these reference forecasts, global growth will reach 2.8% this year and 3% next year, a cumulative downgrade of about 0.8 percentage point relative to our January 2025 WEO update. Under an alternative path that excludes the April tariff announcements, global growth would have seen only a modest downgrade to 3.2% this year. An escalation of trade tensions would further depress growth. Financial conditions could also tighten as markets react negatively to diminished growth prospects and increased uncertainty.
The Congress of South African Trade Unions, or African Trade Unions, COSATU, has refuted National Treasury statement that by not increasing value-added tax, the medium-term revenue shortfall will be $4 billion. In a statement released just after midnight, the National Treasury announced the reversal of the proposed 0.5% VAT increase, which was meant to take effect next week, Thursday. It says Parliament will be requested to adjust expenditure to cover the shortfall in revenue. COSATU Parliamentary Coordinator Matthew Parks says that the shortfall has decreased as a result of South African Revenue Service's improved tax collection.
The shortfall is actually the 14 billion rand that the VAT was meant to have brought the additional 0.5%. And because the South African Revenue Service, through the excellent work of its staff, has already managed to overachieve its collection targets by 9 billion rand, then the shortfall you're actually talking about is very, very small. It's 5 billion rand. We think a 5 billion rand adjustment in the allocations to departments and municipalities can really be done over a cup of coffee. It's not difficult. We think we should give SARS the space to continue to improve its tax collection targets before introducing new targets, especially ones which hurt the poor. And of course, there is space to reduce wasteful expenditure.
South African Power Utility Eskom's recent mandate requiring all small-scale embedded generators to register with them has sparked a controversy, with legal challenges arising over potential cost implications. Now, this development occurs as the South African government aims for an ambitious renewable energy rollout, even though significant grid infrastructure upgrades are acknowledged as a crucial prerequisite. Meanwhile, Empower, a specialist in renewable energy solutions in South Africa, is urging businesses to also prepare for a stricter carbon tax regime in 2026. Business Development Executive at Empower, Matthew Cruz, explains.
So the outcry is actually primarily from homeowners, where the Electrical Regulation Amendment Act that has come into force this year has confirmed that any system below 100 kilowatts does not need to be registered with NERSA, and therefore also not registered with Eskom. And Eskom is saying, no, we want you to register your system. Process of registering, we must convert from whatever tariff you're on to a Eskom Homeflex tariff. We will waive that fee for this year, but next year we'll put a fee in place. But importantly, you do need to pay 13,000 Rand for a smart meter to be installed.
And finally, the European Commission has imposed large fines on U.S. technology giants Apple and Meta, the owner of Facebook. They are the first issued under the bloc's new legislation aimed at curbing the power of big tech. The fines could anger President Donald Trump. The BBC's Chris Valence has the details.
Apple was fined €500 million for preventing app makers from pointing users to cheaper options outside of its own app store. Meta was fined €200 million for requiring Facebook and Instagram users to pay a subscription if they didn't want to be shown ads on the platforms. Both firms hit back at the fines. Apple said it would appeal an unfair decision that was bad for the privacy and security of our users. Meta said the EU was forcing it to change its whole business model.
Your financial indicators: $1 US in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 Naira 607. In Botswana, it's 13.59. Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shillings 65, and in Zambia, it's 28 kwacha 44. The BRICS countries: $1 in Brazil is trading at 5 rubles 71. Russia is 82 rubles 51. India is 85 rupees 40. China at 7 yuan 29, and in South Africa, $1 US is trading at 18 rand 59. $1 is trading at 75 pence to the British pound and 87 to the euro. Looking at commodities, the gold is trading at $3,338 and platinum at $974 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $66.57 a barrel. Now, for any business news stories you would like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I'm Nusi Pozuma.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Well, thank you to Nosipho Zuma with our business news. It is 12:45 Central African time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Our South Africa's government officials, tourism leaders, and stakeholders gathered in Durban in KwaZulu-Natal, in the KwaZulu-Natal province, yesterday to officially launch Africa's Travel Indaba 2025, with this year's theme being Unlimited Africa. The focus is on cross-border collaboration, inclusive growth, and unlocking the continent's untapped tourism potential. And to unpack the highlights of the launch and what lies ahead, we are joined on the line by Thandiwe Matibela, Global Manager for PR, Communications and Stakeholder Relations at South African Tourism. Thandiwe, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Hello, good afternoon, Lulu, and thank you so much to all the listeners from across the continent.
Now, Thandiwe, let's start with the theme for this year, Unlimited Africa. What inspired this theme, and how does it reflect the current vision for tourism on the continent?
It's actually a very bold declaration on the continent's spirit and ambition. You know, we're trying to make sure that the world recognizes that, Africa is not a continent to be, fluffed upon. We are actually a continent that is formidable, and there is great potential, for tourism growth. And that's what we're saying. We're an unapologetically growing and dynamic tourism sector.
And, just speaking of that, the launch brought together key government officials, tourism leaders and stakeholders. What are some of the major commitments that have been made at the event? And also just touch a little bit on a lot of challenges that you may find, inter-travel between, Africans across the continent. Is the issue of the cost implication?
One of the biggest commitments, and it's an ongoing commitment when it comes to Africa's Travel Indaba, is around growing the tourism sector and us doing so together as a continent. So that has always been a focus, and that's why Africa's Travel Indaba is a proudly Pan-African show. I mean, as it stands, we've got about 26 countries that are coming as exhibitors to Africa's Travel Indaba. That actually is us showcasing the broader continent more than just South Africa. So that is the biggest commitment that we've done. What happens at Africa's Travel Indaba is that on the day before the actual show starts, which is Bond Day, we have a lot of engagements where we tackle issues that are facing the greater tourism sector across the continent, and we engage amongst each other and we share knowledge and we actually carve, ways forward in terms of how do we then, get over the challenges that we've got as a sector. But I think what is really important is really about a tourism sector across the African continent that is working together and that is boldly representing itself to the rest of the world. Because what we do is that we invite buyers, which are people that come from various parts of the world, that actually come to see this wide variety of products from the rest of the African continent so that they can go back and package, so that travelers can then opt themselves in so they can actually come and experience all these products and services that are showcased at Africa's Travel Indaba. Currently, as things stand, we've got buyers representation from about 55 countries. So it really just goes to show that we are putting the African continent on the map. Of course, we are not without our challenges as the tourism sector. But what is also important is that our minister has been very deliberate around us working in partnerships with the various countries on the rest of the African continent. Recently, our minister has come back from an outreach in Ghana as an example, and also not just the African continent, but so that we can also work with other countries, such as China and India, who are really fast growing, so that we can actually get travelers from there. So that's what Indaba is really about.
How is SA Tourism ensuring that small businesses, local communities and emerging destinations benefit from this Indaba platform?
What we actually do at Africa's Travel Indaba, and thank you so much for that question, is that we've got a dedicated section at Africa's Travel Indaba where we showcase the lesser known, products and services from South Africa specifically with that, so that we can empower, the smaller players from the South African tourism industry, because we are actually playing host as a destination on that. But what then also happens is that through the various tourism authorities in the various provinces, they also tend to have SMMEs that are sharing with them on their stand so that when they have meetings that are booked, then the SMEs also get an opportunity to be able to showcase, what they do. But over and above that, when we do have a big trade show like Africa's Travel Indaba, we ensure that all service providers that are procured for the execution of the trade show are actually from the province, and not just the city part of the province, but far and wide. So, for example, we will then, hire, from artists to the technical producers, to the actual MCs that will execute the trade show for us, to the guys that are helping us with putting up the infrastructure. So the economic benefits are far and wide. As an example, last year, Indaba contributed a lot of money to the city of Durban. It was 226 million in direct economic activity that was generated for the city of Durban. And we had created more than 1,000 jobs. And we empowered about 120 SMEs that actually got an opportunity to engage with global buyers and media so that they can actually have an access to tell their story and showcase their products and services.
And just in wrapping up, Thandiwe, what's the strategy in terms of positioning Africa's Travel Indaba 2025 as a must-attend event for international tourism stakeholders?
It's actually the biggest global trade show that happens on the African continent. It's got the widest variety in terms of products and services that are at one trade show at any given moment. And that's what we say to the buyers. We say, you're going to come here and you're going to get value in terms of, the variety of products that you're going to see. But also for the exhibitors, we tell them that, there is a quality of buyers and a good set of quality buyers that you'll be able to talk to. And actually with, a potential to generate great business, that will not only benefit the business, but the community. And that's what it is. We really are talking about the value of Africa's Travel Indaba. But over and above it, it is really about driving that narrative about an Africa that is unapologetic about its ambitions to grow. And in fact, it is really about declaring that we are growing as a sector, and most importantly, we're doing it together as the continent.
Thandiwe, thank you so much for joining us on Africa Update.
Thank you so much, Lulu.
That's Thandiwe Matibela, Global Manager for PR, Communications and Stakeholder Relations at South African Tourism, joining us on the line.
Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo on Channel Africa. Africa, meet Abedi.
Yeah, that's me.
Abedi is a music lover through and through.
I really love African music.
He's got a taste for all kinds of tunes and spends his days listening to Channel Africa. Guess what? He didn't know.
Okay.
Channel Africa wants to help Abedi and all music lovers everywhere to discover even more incredible music. That is why Channel Africa is calling on all African musicians to submit their music. Musicians, remember to give us all your relevant information. Make your submissions at music@channelafrica.co.za. Submissions are your chance to be heard on radio. But sadly, they do not guarantee that you'll be playlisted. All submissions will be carefully reviewed to see if they meet our station's requirement. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time.
It's 12:53 Central African Time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Botswana's Ministry of Child Welfare and Basic Education is currently reviewing its national curricula to align with STEAM, that's science, technology, engineering, arts and mathematics learning. A high-level delegation from the ministry led by Minister Gaboo Nan-Kafela Mukoka is in South Africa in an effort to engage and explore opportunities in the education system. Now, the visit seeks to showcase South Africa's leading-edge implementation of coding and robotics across primary school classrooms and early childhood development programs. The minister elaborates.
We have had quite great relations with South Africa. We have shared bilateral relationships, and of course, we share quite a number of issues around basic education. And this time around, with our new ministry under the new government, which is now Child Welfare and Basic Education, we have also gone over some overview of the education system here. And we are aware now that the child welfare component, especially the ECD, has been moved to the basic education sector or ministry in South Africa. And we are here because we now are taking the route of STEAM education, where we now deal with students learning from a very tender age how to innovate, problem solve, and so forth. We want to produce these students who are able to solve problems, to learn skills, especially AI, technology, and so forth at a tender age, because we are now moving from our diamond-based economy or resource-based economy to a knowledge-based economy. And we are here basically to learn and appreciate the pedagogical orientation of the education system here, especially e-content, and how South African education system actually applies STEAM at ECD, pre-primary and primary levels, especially in the area of robotics and coding, and how South African education system actually deals with education with production. I've been listening to the MEC here for Gauteng, and he's talking about students taking some skill-based course, more like vocational skill at every grade, and that's the way we want to take. That is the multi-certification kind of approach that South Africa has, and I think Botswana calls it multiple pathways. And then we are also here to learn how teachers are being retooled so that we could go back home and find ways of retooling our teachers to actually get them towards STEAM education, and how assessment is done within the education system here. And of course, the relationship between STEAM and industry. And I think I learned a lot from MEC there. And then the location, most importantly, of sports in the curriculum. Because in Botswana, we haven't had sports in schools for more than 6 years now. And of course, last but not least, the funding models for education.
And Minister, why was it so important for Botswana to review its national curriculum to align with STEAM learning?
We have inherited a colonial kind of education from our colonial masters, which hasn't actually served us in terms of having our graduates who fit well within the economy or within the market. So we are saying, instead of having graduates who do not possess much of skills that could actually help them grow and not rely on government for employment, we need to train them from a tender age to become, to produce something, so that at the end of the day, they don't just look for jobs, they can also set up their own industries, come up with new innovations, and actually employ others. Very, very self-reliant and quite productive citizens of the future.
Minister, you are currently at Science Bono. What has stood out for you there?
What a center. The hub of innovation, the hub of research. I actually jotted quite a number of things here that impressed me this morning. I just saw their video where they talk about smart classrooms and the interactive platforms that they have, the way they support science and math educators, and programs especially for disadvantaged communities. This is the hub of scientific innovation, the hub of interactive scientific models, which will go a long way in equipping South Africans from a tender age across all classes of society with innovative skills, with AI strategies and skills. For me, that's quite a plus for the country.
And that was Botswana's Minister of Child Welfare and Basic Education, Gaboo Nankafela Mukoka, and she was speaking to Channel Africa's Nhlanhla Mahlangu. And that's how we wrap Africa Update today. Continue with us on our social media platforms. And for myself, Lulu Gaboo, and the team, that's our producer, Tracy Bumgard, our technical operator, Tato Maporoma, and social media, Elaine Bengani. It's been a great one. Let's do this again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Good afternoon. It's just gone 1 o'clock Central African time here on Channel Africa. With your news update, I'm Cholani Tulongwebe. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has cancelled part of his first visit to South Africa after an overnight Russian missile and drone attack on Ukraine's capital Kyiv. At least 9 people were killed and more than 80 injured, including children in the attack. In a post on X, Zelensky says that he would return to Ukraine immediately after meeting his South African counterpart Cyril Ramaphosa as part of his trip to ramp up diplomatic efforts. He says that rescue operations were ongoing following the overnight attack and there was significant destruction. Meanwhile, members of the Mkhonto weSizwe party in South Africa say they are opposed to Zelensky's official visit to South Africa as it is a member of BRICS. Spokesperson for the party, Nhlamulo Ndlela, spoke to Channel Africa outside one of the main gates at the Union Buildings in Pretoria where they were picketing.
We're saying that we cannot have a situation where we bring issues outside of this country and give ourselves problems we don't have in our country. We can't. So Ramaphosa is bringing us problems we don't have in our country, and we're saying that we can't be harboring people, by the way, of the same Ukraine when the war started. They were racist towards Africans there. And now here we are bringing a person who doesn't even represent us ideologically and whose agenda is a neo-imperial, neoliberal posture. We're saying, no, Ramaphosa, don't bring us problems we don't have.
9 suspects, including 2 Border Management Authority officials, are appearing at the Musina Magistrates Court in South Africa's Limpopo province on charges of corruption. The 2 officials and 2 suspected facilitators were arrested with 5 undocumented immigrants on Tuesday at the Beitbridge border post. BMA Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Communication, Mmemme Mokhotsi, says the 2 officials were seen engaging with 2 suspected facilitators. A taxi carrying travellers was allowed to pass through after the officials allegedly received a bribe. Mokhotsi says the vehicle was intercepted and was found to be carrying 18 travellers, 5 of whom were undocumented.
In a concerted effort to root out corruption and strengthen the integrity of South Africa's ports of entry operations, the Border Management Authority conducted a successful intelligence-driven operations at the Beitbridge port of entry during the Easter period. The operation led to the arrest of 2 immigration officials, 5 undocumented foreign nationals, 2 suspected facilitators involved in the alleged unlawful entry of persons into the Republic and contravention of the Immigration Act.
As Malawi inches closer to the 2025 general elections, opposition parties are once again considering the idea of forming a political alliance. Some parties have announced that they will not contest the upcoming September 16th general elections independently, signalling plans to form a political alliance with other parties. The move has drawn praise from some political analysts who say it reflects the current political landscape in Malawi. The September 16th presidential and legislative elections are one of the most consequential in the country's recent history. Presidential candidate Enoch Chihana is the current president of the Alliance for Democracy Party.
What is also happening in Malawi now is that the political parties in the opposition are also talking. We may have very soon an alliance also, like what happened in the Tons Alliance. This is what is happening at the moment. It's being discussed anytime within 30 days.
Police in Tanzania have detained 2 senior opposition figures as they drove to a court hearing for the Chadema party leader Tundu Lissu today. Lissu, who was runner-up in a presidential election in 2020, was charged with treason this month over what prosecutors said was a speech calling on the public to rebel and disrupt presidential and parliamentary elections that are expected to take place in October. Days later, the country's election commission disqualified Chadema from taking part in the elections on the grounds that it failed to sign an election code of conduct on time. The charges against Lissu, who survived being shot 16 times in 2017, have placed the president of the country, Samia Suluhu Hassan's human rights record under the spotlight as she seeks re-election. For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Cholani Tulongwebe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.